following article was in the American Lutheran Survey of April 1923, and actually appeared prior to that in the New York Christian Advocate. Its title is "The American Home Passing Away" and was by Dr. Bert Edward Smith. At the time, it seems relevant for today because at the time they were asking, is the American home passing away? Whereas today we live at the point in time when the traditional family home in America exists only minimally compared to what it did back in 1923 when this was first published. So let's go to the article. One of the conclusions reached by Professor Elwood in the Reconstruction of Religion is that the indispensable preliminary to a Christian society is a Christian family life. The family unit is basic in the task of Christianizing the individual experience and social relationships of people. If the home is a fundamental institution, indispensable to the growth of Christian society, then great precaution should be taken to preserve its integrity and to guard against the dangers that lurk at its doors. In spite of the complex and changing order of society, for the sake of everything that humanity considers worthwhile, the sanctity of family relationships and the fundamental primacy of the home as a unit of society must be protected. The conditions that exist in society cast many obstacles in the way of family life. Some of them are inevitable, and the home must adjust itself without losing the elements that make it central and supreme. Others are inexcusable and must be fearlessly fought. The purpose of this article is to call attention to a few of the dangers that threaten the home and to suggest a few ways in which the Church can help protect it from moral breakdown. There was a time when the interests of the individual seemed to center in the home and to take place for the sake of the home. The simplicity of home life made it easier to include things cultural and religious. The clothing was homespun, the food homegrown, and most of the articles used about the house were homemade. The home was the school, the church, and the playground. Those days are gone forever, and we would not return to them if we could, and we could not if we would. Today, the clothier, the grocer, the butcher, and the furniture dealer supply our needs. The public schools have taken over the major responsibility for education. The recreational needs are met by the gymnasium and the public playground. Alas, religion has been too largely committed to some agency outside of the home. This decentralization of home interest has scattered the family group until home in many cases has become a boarding house where the family assembles to sleep and eat, a headquarters for a group whose interests seem to center in business and society. Social life has become so complex and business so compelling that many follow the line of least resistance, which usually lead to a letdown in the conduct of the home. Along with the transfer of many interests away from the home stands the mad rush of people for pleasure. One of the great problems facing society relates to the manner in which leisure time shall be spent. Old and young alike seem to be craving something that will entertain rather than discipline the mind and body. Very often, when the members of the family might all be at home together, getting acquainted and doing something to create a family spirit, they celebrate by spending the evening at the movies, the club, or some other place where mere amusement seems to be the goal. A storm of vicious propaganda against the monogamous family life and against the divine element in the marriage relationship is raging almost everywhere. The jest at the movie or vaudeville that usually provokes the most uproarious laughter is the one that deals with some should-be sacred relationship of the family. The same is true in the cheap story or the joke column in the daily paper. Judge Bartlett of Reno, whose county, by the way, in 1916 granted 27% more divorces than it did marriage license, recently broadcast an article advocating a simple and easy road through the divorce court. He declares that marriage is a civil contract and not a sacrament, that no couple knows how long love for each other is going to last, and that when it dies in either party, the marriage contract should be promptly annulled. We cannot change or charge all socialists nor all socialism with seeking to overthrow of an institution so essential as the monogamous family. There are, however, leaders and groups who are crying out against the forecasting of the downfall of the family. Karl Marx, in the Communist Manifesto, states that the bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course with the vanishing of capital. Friedrich Engels, who in The Origin of the Family states that we are now approaching a social revolution in which the old economic foundations for monogamy will disappear. And socialism and family. Mr. H.G. Wells says, socialism is the state of the family. The only family of the private individual must vanish before it. The conflict between pagan physiology and individualism and the Christian doctrine of personal responsibility rages more furiously today than it ever has. There can be no doubt as to the final outcome. The theories of life practiced and expounded by the Galilean will surely forge their way into the thinking and conduct of mankind. The insane individualism that issues in war, suspicion, intolerance, profiteering, crime, licentious living, and other forms of evil can never become a permanent basis upon which to build a civilized society. The home is a social institution. The master clothes the description of his kingdom in the language of the home. The family life must be built upon sacrifice, not upon selfishness. Understanding and adaptation and tolerance are all essentials of love. Romance and physical pleasure are feeble excuses for the marriage vow. Individualism in action accounts for much of the cruelty, the desertion, the infidelity, and the divorce. The drift of women into society, politics, and gainful occupations is sure to work hardship upon the family life. The equality of rights does not mean the identity of function, said Roosevelt. The greatest need of the world is a mother. The divorce danger is a byproduct of conditions mentioned above, together with inadequate laws governing marriage, divorce, and remarriage. The lax enforcement of the laws that do exist, the tendency to institutionalize religion out of the home, and the activity of an army of pinhead pettifoggers who earn their bread by showing troubled people the easy way through the divorce court. The growth of divorce is an alarming menace to the American social life. The cause is in part industrial, social, legal, and not entirely moral. The readjustment of family life has not kept pace with the lightning changes that have taken place in the social order. Some figures from the government census may throw light upon the present crises. In the 20 years ending in 1906, our nation granted one divorce for every 13 marriages. England granted one for every 466, Italy one for every 321, Scotland one for 187, Austria one for every 152, and Australia one for every 98, and etc. The only large country having a higher divorce rate than the United States was Japan, with one divorce for every 4 marriages. And in the single year 1916, our country granted one divorce for every 9 marriages. It does not, the other extreme is South Carolina, in which divorce has been illegal since 1878. It does not require a statistical wizard to forecast the conditions that will exist in a society a few generations from now if this same rate of increase continues. Many factors enter into the conditions that menace the present-day family life. One is inclined to become discouraged as he analyzes the perils of the modern home and could easily conclude that a tragic collapse of moral ideals had taken place and that a high type of home conduct is irrevocable. This, however, is an unwarranted despair. The problem is not entirely one of morals. The economic, social, and judicial elements enter largely into the case, and remedies will too be sought in the light of underlying causes. Society will never allow an institution so essential as the home to be torn down and destroyed. The making of laws will not correct every social evil, but a study of the statutes governing marriage and divorce convinces one that lawmaking bodies should give some attention to this need. We cannot hope to reduce the stampede to the divorce court as long as our marriage laws are not enforced, and the physically and morally unfit can secure a marriage license at will. There are cases when for the good of society, the marriage contract should be annulled, but divorce is only a quack remedy for a fatal disease. If fewer of the unfit were permitted to marry, if marriage were more than a bit of romance or a temporary adventure, if the standards were lifted until the mistakes was the rare exception, if society recognized that the family is a divine institution, if there were a federal marriage and divorce and remarriage law strictly enforced, then the stampede to the court of domestic relationships would be much reduced. Divorce should not be made impossible, but very difficult. There is no easy road through the divorce court in Canada, and that accounts for the fact that only 431 divorces were granted for every 43. Were granted in 40 years, A lapse of several months should be required before divorcees are allowed to remarry. A divorce protector should be appointed to expose collusion and perjury, desertion and cruelty, the grounds for 60% of all divorces should be made a criminal offense and offenders punished severely. Little attention is given by most courts to the merits of the divorce petition. Much of the above can be traced to the ignorance of people concerning the sacred meaning of a married life. The public school, the church, and the home should instruct young people on the purpose and responsibility of the family and counteract those agencies in the community designed to undercut its integrity. Parents should study the community from the standpoint of its home needs, the benefit of prohibition to the family group, the conditions of existing at places where children spend their leisure time, the influence of books, music, and movies that make fun for the family tie or of the family tie, the newspapers, slush that displays the broken home without stigmatizing the home breaker, and all other factors that have bearing upon the home life. The individualism which creeps into the practice of nearly every home and controls the conduct of many homes must be met not by authority but by instruction. The education of young people on the fundamental importance of the family, the sanctity of marriage vow, and the follies of free love and trial marriage and divorce cannot help but do a great deal of good. Laws and learning are not needed, but they are not sufficient. After all, the great need is the presence in the family of a great dynamic that will lift its life to the plane of its ideals. The Christian people should tackle the task of lifting their own family life to a higher level and also of creating an atmosphere that will be breathed by that part of society that not included in the church. The transcendency of present-day life and the demand of business and society make it mighty difficult to keep a rigid religious program going in the home. For the sake of making the home the kind of force it should be, parents should regulate their schedules to include regular worship and Bible study. A stay-at-home night would be a new departure for many families. Two things are observed in the closing paragraphs. The first is that there are a great number of homes that are conspicuous exceptions to the neglect and individualism referred to in the earlier parts of the article. The other is that many homes from which worship has slipped away or into which worship was never introduced recognize the value of this custom and are willing to revive it if somebody will give them a start and show them how. The Christian people must create the atmosphere and supply the leadership if the home is to escape the perils that threaten to overthrow and continue to hold its royal place in Christian society.